My name is Grace Taylor. I'm 29, and I thought I knew everything about the man I loved. For 10 months, Braden and I had been living together in what I assumed was our rental home, our shared space, a little world of ordinary routines and quiet evenings. He was 31, charming, with a way of making even the mundane feel effortless. I liked that about him. But that morning shattered everything I thought I knew. I had finished early at the spa, where I worked as a wellness coordinator, the soft hum of fluorescent lights fading behind me as I walked to my car. The driveway looked normal at first, empty, but then I noticed a white van, unmarked, parked at the curb. Not Braden's, not anyone I knew. My pulse picked up, a faint prickle of unease creeping along my spine. When I stepped inside, the scene stopped me cold. 3 women I had never seen before moved busily around the living room. Boxes everywhere, a small photography setup, and an organized chaos that reeked of business. One woman was photographing products arranged meticulously on our coffee table. Another was packaging items into mailers at the dining table. Can I help you?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. The photographer looked at me like I was intruding on a secret ceremony. "We're with Melody Glow. This is the fulfillment center," she said, showing her phone with our address clearly listed. Fulfillment center? My pulse spiked. I recognized the name vaguely, but I had never associated it with Braden or our home. "Melody Glow?" I repeated carefully. "I think you have the wrong address." "Nope, this is correct," she said a little warily. The name, the address, everything matched. Braden appeared then, from somewhere behind the chaos, brushing his hands on his jeans. "Grace," he said, with that casual tone he always used to calm me down. "Hey, babe, everything okay?" I stopped in the doorway, taking in the boxes, the cameras, the mess. "Braden, what is this?" He blinked at me like he hadn't seen me there. "It's just business," he said. "You're early. I didn't expect you until later." This was no ordinary business. I started asking questions, trying to understand. A woman handed me a small box with a logo, Melody Glow Premium Wellness Supplements. My fingers trembled slightly as I turned it over. Expiration date, a month ago. I looked up at Braden. "These are expired. People could get sick. You've been selling this?" He shrugged. "They're just vitamins, Grace. Everyone exaggerates online reviews." I froze. My internal alarm bells rang. I had seen the reviews online. People complaining about allergic reactions. Some even hospitalized. I had no idea how long he had been hiding this from me. Our home had become a warehouse for potentially dangerous products. "Braden, the FDA has already sent warnings here. These letters..." I paused, realizing he had tried to hide them in a closet. "They were unopened." He laughed. Actually laughed. My stomach sank. "Illegal? Grace, it's called entrepreneurship. Maybe if you had any ambition beyond, I don't know, fixing air conditioners, you'd understand." My chest tightened, anger flared. "Braden, this is our house. You're putting people at risk. I can't..." "Stop being dramatic," he snapped. "If you don't trust me, maybe you should leave." The words hit me like a cold wave. Trust? I hadn't been untrusting until now, but seeing the reality of what he'd built behind my back, the deception, the risk, he was right in one sense. I didn't trust him anymore. That night, I started methodically photographing everything. The boxes, every mailer, the inventory in the spare room, and yes, the FDA letters. Braden ranted around me, pacing, shouting about how I was overreacting, how I didn't support his success. I packed my things quietly, each motion deliberate, each photograph a shield against his denials. By morning, I had loaded my car while he showered, leaving a note on the counter. Simple, clean. "As requested, I'm leaving. Good luck with Melody Glow." An hour later, my phone buzzed. "Really? You're actually leaving over vitamins?" I didn't respond. I had already made my choice. From the moment I discovered Melody Glow, everything about Braden had shifted. The man I thought I knew, his charm, his laughter, his casual confidence, was now overshadowed by recklessness, secrecy, and a complete disregard for consequences. I realized then that this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, I wouldn't be passive. I wouldn't let him manipulate the truth. I would take control, document every step, and prepare for the fallout. And as I drove away from the house, leaving Braden and his empire of expired supplements behind, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I had no idea how far this would go, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity: nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. The bed felt empty, the silence almost mocking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the boxes, the cameras, the women bustling around our living room as if it had been their office all along, and Braden, his smug laughter echoing in my ears. How long had he been hiding this from me? How long had I been living in a house that had been turned into a fulfillment center for dangerous, expired supplements? The next morning, I returned. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed documentation. Every box, every package, every letter from the FDA. I moved through the house like a ghost, careful not to disturb the evidence, careful to capture everything. My camera phone clicked relentlessly, images stacking up like proof against the man I loved. When Braden emerged from the kitchen, sipping his coffee, he paused. "Grace, what are you doing?" His voice was deceptively calm, but the tension in his eyes betrayed him. I held up my phone, documenting all of it. Every box, every package, every FDA warning. His expression twisted, 5 emotions flickering across his face in a heartbeat. Surprise, indignation, disbelief, irritation, and finally, defiance. "You went through my things?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Your things? Braden, our home is being used as a warehouse for expired supplements. People have already been hurt. I can't ignore this." He laughed again, low and bitter. "You're dramatic. I'm building something here, Grace. A real business. Maybe if you had ambition." "I don't care about ambition," I interrupted, my voice rising. "I care about ethics, about people not getting sick, about laws you're breaking in our own living room." He slammed his hand on the counter. "If you don't trust me, maybe you should leave." I froze. Those words, familiar, almost casual, hit me like a punch. The same line he had thrown at me before, but now they carried weight. I didn't trust him. Not anymore, and leaving was no longer just an option. It was a strategy. I spent the day packing my essentials, moving quietly, snapping pictures, and cataloging everything. Braden ranted from room to room. Accusations, manipulations, gaslighting. He painted me as jealous, as unsupportive, as someone who didn't believe in his dreams. His voice carried the arrogance of someone who thought the rules didn't apply to him. Inside, I felt a storm of emotions: betrayal, anger, disbelief, and, unexpectedly, clarity. I realized that the man I loved was not who I thought he was, and the Grace Taylor who had tolerated charm over truth, patience over honesty, was no longer the Grace who would be manipulated quietly. By evening, I had moved everything I needed into my car. Braden was oblivious, showering upstairs while I left a single, simple note on the counter. "As requested, I'm leaving. Good luck with Melody Glow." I didn't wait for a reply. I drove to my friend Jerome's spare room, my temporary refuge, where silence was a luxury I had almost forgotten. Later, Braden's texts came, relentless. "Really? You're leaving over vitamins? Then whatever. More room for my inventory now. Your half of rent is still due, BTW." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Everything had already been said in the photographs, the documents, the quiet act of walking away with integrity intact. But as I settled into Jerome's spare room that night, I realized this was far from over. Braden's empire wasn't just dangerous. It was fragile, built on deception and secrecy. And now I had the power to expose it, to dismantle the illusion he had carefully constructed. I leaned back against the pillow, my heart still racing. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control, of strategy. The confrontation had ended, but the escalation, the real game, was just beginning. Because Braden had underestimated me. He thought leaving would make me a passive observer, but I was already plotting the next moves quietly, meticulously, and with a resolve that surprised even me. 3 days after I left, I returned, not to reclaim a home, but to reclaim my power. From the outside, everything looked normal. The white van was gone. The living room was a chaotic mix of boxes and equipment. And Braden, of course, was nowhere in sight. But what I had discovered in those quiet hours at Jerome's place changed everything. It wasn't just the documentation I had gathered, the photos of every box, every FDA letter, every label that could make someone sick. No, the real leverage was something Braden had never told me. He didn't just rent this house, he owned it. Through an LLC, BH Property Holdings, the house had been his investment all along, and I, thinking I was just a tenant contributing to rent, had been playing right into his deception. The first call I made was to the property management company. I didn't speak to Braden, I spoke to the facts. Calm, methodical. Yes, I have proof he's violating safety laws. Yes, I am filing an eviction notice as the property owner. Every word I spoke was deliberate, measured, strategic. By the next morning, a certified notice sat on the kitchen counter, 30 days to vacate. I didn't send it from my personal email. I sent it under the LLC, making sure Braden had no idea it came from the man who legally owned the house. The reactions that followed were spectacular. Texts, calls, and frantic messages flooded my phone. WTF? Is this eviction notice real? I live here too. Braden didn't understand that his arrogance had blinded him. He hadn't just endangered customers, he had underestimated me. He tried to spin it on social media, portraying me as a jealous ex who weaponized the law against his burgeoning empire. He called friends, neighbors, and even clients, casting me as the villain. But I stayed silent, patient, letting the evidence, photographs, FDA letters, the proof of expired supplements, speak for itself. And then came the escalation I had anticipated. Braden attempted to enter the house at night, trying his old keys, even attempting to jimmy a window. I had already changed the locks and installed motion-triggered cameras. Every attempt was recorded, cataloged, and stored. The footage was chilling, but it also gave me a calm satisfaction. He was unraveling, step by step, and I was watching from the shadows, fully prepared. The best part, though, was seeing his empire start to crumble without my interference. Customers who had relied on his house as a pickup point arrived to empty rooms. Returns went unanswered. Negative reviews piled up online. His business, already precarious due to expired supplements, now faltered under the weight of logistical failure and public backlash. It was during this period that I realized something crucial. Braden's arrogance, his charm, his casual disregard for rules, those traits that had once drawn me to him, were exactly what had led to his downfall. He had thought he was untouchable, that no one could penetrate his little world of deception. But I had. And now, from a distance, I witnessed the unraveling of everything he thought he controlled. Inside, I felt a mix of emotions I hadn't expected. Satisfaction, yes. Relief, absolutely. But also a strange melancholy, an echo of the man I had loved, buried beneath the chaos he created. There was a part of me that mourned what could have been, if only honesty had been a foundation, rather than manipulation. Yet the clarity was undeniable. I had taken control. Every photograph, every note, every calculated move had shifted the balance. Braden was no longer in the driver's seat. He was reacting, scrambling, trying to regain a foothold, but the truth was now in my hands. And as I watched the sunset over the house that had been his empire, I realized the most satisfying part was silent, unseen, and absolute. He had built everything on lies. And now, without violence, without confrontation, those lies were beginning to collapse under their own weight. 2 weeks into the eviction period, the first official knock came, not from Braden, not from an angry neighbor, but from federal agents. I was sitting at Jerome's spare room, scrolling through my phone, when the calls came. Mr. BH Property Holdings? Federal agents are at the property asking about Melody Glow. My chest tightened. This was the moment I had anticipated, yet it still carried a thrill of vindication. I drove over immediately, arriving to see 2 FDA investigators stepping through the doorway, notebooks in hand, examining the remnants of Braden's empire. The chaos he had left behind, boxes, mailers, and expired supplements scattered around, was now evidence. I showed them everything I had photographed, the inventory, the mailers, the unopened warning letters, the labels of expired supplements. I explained calmly what I had discovered, how Braden had been operating despite repeated warnings, and how I had documented it all. Their interest intensified when I mentioned the hospitalizations linked to his detox powders. Braden arrived later, flustered, pacing, trying to explain, trying to charm, trying to spin a story of entrepreneurship under attack. But the evidence was overwhelming. Every lie he had told was now laid bare. Expired supplements, ignored FDA warnings, a fulfillment center disguised in someone else's home. And outside, I could see the empire he had built start to implode in real time. Customers arrived at the house for product pickups only to find no one there. Negative reviews surged online. Returns went unanswered. Social media posts painted him as reckless and irresponsible. His charm couldn't fix this, and his arrogance only made it worse. I watched, silent but fully aware of my own satisfaction. Braden's meltdown on social media was almost cinematic. Videos of him crying, shouting, blaming everyone from the FDA to jealous ex-girlfriends. But the truth, my truth, remained unspoken, documented, legal, untouchable. Even his attempts to manipulate others failed. Friends, associates, and even his lawyer, Hampton, began distancing themselves. He had no support network left. The people who had once fawned over his supposed ambition now saw the man beneath the facade. And in the quiet of the empty house, I imagined him walking through, looking at the bare floors and silent rooms, his empire echoing emptily around him. The irony was inescapable. Every boast, every manipulative tactic, every reckless choice had led him here. He had built a world on deceit, and now the walls were collapsing, the emptiness echoing louder than any words. Inside me, the emotions were layered. Relief that I had acted decisively, satisfaction that truth and accountability prevailed, and a lingering sadness for the loss of someone I once loved. Yet the clarity was sharp. I had done the right thing, not for vengeance, but for ethics, for safety, and for my own integrity. By the time Braden finally left the property, loaded into a U-Haul with Hampton trying to mediate, the house was empty. The inventory remained only in my photographs and the federal evidence. I watched from a distance, knowing this was the turning point. His empire was gone, his control broken, and I was free. And though I would never say it aloud, I felt a quiet, almost reverent satisfaction as I reflected on the emptiness of the house. The echo of his empire was a testament to the consequences of lies. Months had passed since the eviction, since the federal investigation, since Braden's meltdown and the collapse of Melody Glow. The house that had once been the stage for deception and chaos now stood quiet, rented to a responsible accountant, a tenant who paid on time and respected the space. I sometimes drove past, and the stillness made me exhale without thinking, a release I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. Braden's world had unraveled completely. Bankruptcy filings, lawsuits from customers who had fallen ill, legal fees, and social media disgrace left him isolated. Hampton, the lawyer who had tried to smooth over the chaos, eventually cut ties, leaving Braden to face the consequences of his arrogance alone. Even his ex-girlfriend faded into memory, a shadow of a past he couldn't leverage or manipulate. For me, the aftermath was quieter, more introspective. I had learned lessons I hadn't expected. Trust was precious, yes, but it wasn't blind. Ambition mattered, but never at the expense of ethics or truth. And control over my own life, my choices, and my boundaries was the most powerful currency of all. Sometimes I thought back to the moment he had yelled, "If you don't trust me, maybe you should leave." I remembered the sting of betrayal, the weight of disbelief, and yet, leaving had been the catalyst. Leaving had been the moment I reclaimed my life, my agency, and my moral clarity. I kept some quiet mementos from that time. Photographs, the FDA letters, reminders of the meticulous documentation that had protected me and exposed his recklessness. But mostly, I stored the memory of empowerment, the knowledge that in a world of lies and manipulation, I had chosen integrity. I had acted decisively, not out of vengeance, but out of principle. And in the silence of that empty house, long after Braden had gone, the truth resonated. The echo of his empire, built on deceit, was louder than any words he could have said. It was a sound of consequences, of accountability, and ultimately of liberation. I had loved, I had been deceived, and I had acted. And in that sequence, I had found a version of myself I hadn't fully known, resolute, unyielding, and free. Some days, I still think of him. The arrogance, the charm, the reckless ambition. But mostly, I think of the quiet strength it took to walk away, of the patience to document, to strategize, to ensure that justice, not vengeance, prevailed. The house smells clean again. No expired supplements, no chaos, no echoes of deception. And me? I'm thriving in my own space, living a life on my terms, guided by truth and integrity. And in the quiet moments when the world is still, I hear the faint echo of that empty house, not as a memory of loss, but as a testament that truth, courage, and decisiveness will always speak louder than lies, manipulation, and deceit. The story is over, the chaos resolved, the empire crumbled, and I am free.